We're not just searching for a fugitive. We're searching for a ghost. Sheriff Chris Whitsett. It is June 2nd, 2025, and the relentless search for Travis Decker, a father accused of murdering his 3 young daughters, has already stretched into several days. Paityn, 9, Evelyn, 8, and Olivia, 5, were found dead at a remote campsite in Chelan County, Washington. Their bodies were discovered in an unimaginable state of violence. Each had been suffocated, their wrists bound with zip ties, their heads covered with plastic bags. The chilling details left no doubt. Their father was the killer. But the question was no longer just about who committed this horrific act. The question was, where was Travis Decker, the man responsible for their deaths? How had he vanished so completely into the wilderness? Decker, now the most wanted fugitive in the state, had disappeared into the vast, rugged terrain of Chelan County, an area as beautiful as it is unforgiving. The manhunt that ensued stretched beyond local authorities. Helicopters were deployed to scan the landscape. K9 units combed through dense forests. Volunteers from the community joined the search. But no matter how many resources were mobilized, the search felt like they were chasing something invisible, something that couldn't be caught. Sheriff Chris Whitsett knew the terrain well. He had spent his career navigating the dense, rugged backwoods of Chelan County, but something felt different about this search. Travis Decker's background, a former soldier with military training and a history of surviving in the wild, made him more dangerous than any fugitive Whitsett had faced before. It wasn't just about catching a killer. It was about catching a man who could disappear into the forest and survive for weeks with nothing but his wits and his knowledge of the land. The wilderness around Chelan County stretches across hundreds of thousands of acres, a vast, untouched expanse that is as much a part of the search as the officers themselves. The terrain is harsh, the trees thick, the mountains towering and impassable. Travis Decker, now a ghost in this immense landscape, knew it better than anyone. And every second that passed without finding him felt like the wilderness itself was working against them, swallowing their efforts, keeping him hidden. Whitsett's thoughts raced as he led his team through the endless stretches of trees. The stakes of this manhunt were higher than anything he had experienced before. The murder of 3 innocent children, the brutality of it, and the knowledge that their killer was still out there, lingering in the same woods he now patrolled, ate at him. This is not just about finding a fugitive, Whitsett realized. It was about understanding the depths of a father's betrayal. What drove Travis Decker to murder his daughters? And why had he planned it so carefully? Days passed, and still, there was no sign of Travis Decker. The officers were tired. The terrain was harsh, the weather unpredictable, and each day without progress pushed them further into exhaustion. But it wasn't just the physical toll of the search that wore them down. It was the psychological burden of hunting a man who had murdered his own flesh and blood, and the mental weight of the realization that Decker, trained to survive in the wilderness, might be watching them at this very moment. Deputy Rick Jensen, part of the K9 unit, felt the growing pressure. His thoughts swirled with frustration and doubt. Where is he? Has he slipped through our fingers? Jensen would ask himself as he walked deeper into the woods. The endless search felt futile at times, the weight of deprivation and uncertainty constantly pressing on him. The emotional toll on the officers was starting to show. The deaths of Paityn, Evelyn, and Olivia haunted them. Each day of searching felt like a reminder of the lives stolen by someone they had once believed could be rehabilitated. Decker wasn't just a suspect. He was a father who killed his own daughters, and now they were left to clean up the mess he'd made. Jensen, like many of the officers, couldn't help but wonder if they were searching for a man who had already decided his fate. What if he was already dead? While the officers struggled through the wilderness, Whitney Decker, still reeling from the loss of her daughters, was left with nothing but questions. The hours dragged on, the days stretched into weeks, and the pain only deepened. Each update on the search felt like a new wave of grief. Hope flared only to be extinguished by the reality of the situation. Whitney tried to hold it together, to be strong, to support the investigation, but every new report, every new clue that came in, felt like a cruel reminder of the horror she was living. She couldn't escape the thought of Travis. The man she had once trusted, the man she had married, was now the monster who had stolen her children. Her mind spiraled as she thought about their last exchange. How had it come to this? How had the man she once loved become the man who could kill his own children? Each memory, each gesture, felt like a betrayal she couldn't reconcile. The simple act of saying goodbye that evening had been normal. Too normal. "I'll see you at 8, she had said, trusting that this time it would be no different. But it was different. As the search continued, Whitney felt herself pulled between hope and doubt. Was Decker still alive? The thought that he might be out there, somewhere, hiding, felt like a wound that wouldn't heal. Would they ever find him? And if they did, what then? Would he confess? Would she ever understand why he had done it? By June 6th, the search had intensified, but Decker remained elusive. But then a breakthrough emerged. Investigators began to dig deeper into Decker's past, and when they examined his cell phone records, they uncovered something chilling. Searches that made it clear Decker had planned his escape. He hadn't just murdered his daughters in a fit of rage. This was part of a much bigger plan. The search history revealed disturbing details. How to disappear, how to survive in the wilderness, and how to move to Canada. These weren't just random thoughts. They were deliberate steps in Decker's escape plan. He had been preparing for this moment, planning how to vanish, how to start a new life. And in doing so, he had killed his daughters to clear the way. For Sheriff Whitsett, this discovery added a new dimension to the case. It wasn't just about finding Decker. It was about understanding him, understanding how a man could plan the murder of his children so methodically. What drove him? What was his endgame? The psychological complexity of the crime deepened, and the hunt for Decker took on a new urgency. With the discovery of Decker's escape plans, the emotional stakes rose. Whitney found herself trapped in a spiraling vortex of grief and anger. Her mind kept returning to the same question. Why? How could the father of her children plan their deaths with such detachment, as if they were mere obstacles in his path? The psychological toll on law enforcement was also becoming evident. The officers, once determined, were now battling their own doubts. The weight of searching for a father who murdered his children was a burden they couldn't escape. Every hour spent searching felt like a betrayal to the victims, a frustrating, slow march toward justice. Whitney's own sense of frustration grew as she waited for answers. The longer Decker remained hidden, the more she felt the grief turning into a frenzied obsession. She couldn't stop thinking about what he had done and what he was planning to do next. The hunt for Decker has now reached a psychological breaking point. The question remains, is he still out there? Has the wilderness swallowed him whole, or is he lying in wait, watching and waiting for them to make a mistake? As Sheriff Whitsett looks out over the wilderness one more time, he's left with the same haunting question that has plagued him since the search began. Where is he? And more importantly, what happens next? The search for Decker is far from over, but with each passing hour, the emotional and psychological weight grows heavier for everyone involved. The discovery of Travis Decker's search history introduces a new, chilling dimension to the investigation. It becomes clear that Decker was planning his escape all along, not simply reacting to a moment of rage. The premeditation adds psychological complexity to the case, shifting the focus from a man who snapped to a man who made a cold, calculated decision to murder his daughters. Finding them wasn't the hardest part. It was looking at their tiny bodies and knowing that someone who should have loved them was the one who took them away. Sheriff Chris Whitsett. The search for Paityn, Evelyn, and Olivia Decker had already been agonizingly long, each hour dragging into another. The officers had combed through miles of dense forest, their steps heavy with the weight of what they were trying to avoid. But now, the silence of the woods had shifted. It had deepened, taken on an oppressive weight. Something was about to change, and they were about to face the unthinkable. The truck had been found. Travis Decker's pickup, abandoned, sitting still with the weight of death already sinking into the air. The bloody handprints smeared across the tailgate told them the worst. It was the first clue that something terrible had happened. But that wasn't the discovery that changed everything. The bodies of Paityn, Evelyn, and Olivia would do that. The discovery happened quickly, almost too quickly. The officers and deputies had gathered around the truck, cautious but with a quiet sense of urgency. There was no sign of Decker, no trace of him anywhere near the truck. But they weren't looking for him right now. They were looking for answers. Sheriff Whitsett couldn't help but feel his gut tighten as he saw the bloodied handprints. That's when he knew. This wasn't just a case of a father and his daughters getting lost in the woods. This was something much darker, something much more deliberate. Whitsett stepped forward, his boots crunching softly against the gravel, every inch of his body preparing for what was to come. His mind, sharp and calculating, already knew it. They were about to find the girls. His heart, though, was still caught between disbelief and dread. These were children, his thoughts racing back to his own family. The psychological complexity of it hit him even harder now, standing on the edge of the known and the unknown. What could possess a father to do something like this? A voice in the distance, one of the deputies, shouted for him to come over. They'd found something. Whitsett moved quickly, his body on autopilot, but his mind still reeling. He wasn't ready for this. No one was. There was no sound as they approached. The girls were small, their bodies lifeless and still, lying on the ground at the base of a small embankment. The shock that settled in was immediate and brutal. The suffocation was evident. The plastic bags over their heads, their small hands bound tightly with zip ties. The sight was so stark, so final, that Whitsett's body froze. This wasn't a random tragedy. This was something cold and methodical. And Travis Decker was at the center of it. As the officers gathered around, Whitsett's eyes scanned the scene, piecing together the terrible narrative unfolding in front of him. No struggle, no signs of panic. This had been calculated. They had been killed slowly, carefully. And they were so young, each of them just children, so small that the violence of it felt even more unbearable. Deputy Rick Jensen, who had been with the sheriff throughout the search, had a hard time swallowing the reality of what they were seeing. The bodies, each so young, seemed to distort the world around him. His mind was hazy, overwhelmed by what should have been a simple mission: find the children, find Decker. Instead, they had found death. The evidence hit them all like a truck, but they couldn't look away. Sheriff Whitsett stood above the girls, his eyes darting between them and the surroundings. He'd seen violence, had seen the aftermath of horrific events. But this was different. The fact that Decker, their father, had been the one to bring them here, to bind their tiny bodies with such cold efficiency, felt like a wound to the very heart of the law. Whitsett thought about the search. They'd been looking for a man, but now they weren't just looking for anyone. They were looking for a killer, a man who had systematically murdered his daughters. The physical toll on Whitsett was evident now. His throat constricted with a familiar emotion, but he forced it down. He had a job to do. He had to find Decker. In the moments that followed, Whitsett's thoughts turned to Decker, the father, the man who had been granted the right to visit his daughters. That right, it seemed now, had been the tool used to lure them to this tragic end. Decker had promised Whitney, his ex-wife, that he would return them at 8 p.m. He had broken that promise long before, but it was now undeniable. Decker had intended to kill them all along. The realization crashed in like a wave. This wasn't an accident. It wasn't a spur-of-the-moment act of rage. Decker had planned this. He had prepared for it. There was no easy way to process that. There was no explanation that could make sense of this. The investigation quickly took a darker turn. The truck had been abandoned with bloody handprints, and now they had the bodies. But there was one final piece of evidence that spoke volumes. When they examined Decker's phone, the search history became their stark answer. How to disappear. How to survive off the grid. How to move to Canada. The evidence confirmed something they had feared from the start. This wasn't a crime of passion. This was cold-blooded premeditation. Decker had known what he was doing. He had planned it. The idea that he had murdered his children for the sake of starting over somewhere else, far from the life he had built, was almost beyond comprehension. As the hours passed, the search expanded, but the team's focus had shifted. The discovery of the girls' bodies, so carefully staged, was now only a piece of a much larger puzzle. The reality of what Decker had done became clearer with each passing moment. The emotional toll on the team grew. For Deputy Jensen, the pain was palpable. He had seen death, but this was a new level of loss. His eyes lingered on the faces of the girls, and he could feel the weight of the injustice pressing on him. Witsett, too, struggled with the reality of what had just unfolded. His face, typically calm and composed, betrayed a deep sense of anger and sorrow. He had been tasked with protecting the community, but he had failed these girls. The guilt of that failure ate at him, but he couldn't afford to let it take over. He had a job to do: find Decker. The symbolic toll of this discovery, the fact that a father had been capable of such an act, felt like a personal failure for everyone involved. Law enforcement, the system, and the community at large had trusted Decker, and they had failed to see the cracks beneath the surface. The systemic failure to intervene in time had led to this moment, and the realization was as devastating as the crime itself. The discovery of Travis Decker's search history is a game-changer in the investigation. It not only confirms his premeditation, but also presents a chilling new perspective. Decker wasn't just trying to escape the law. He was planning a complete escape from his old life, willing to sacrifice everything, including his own daughters, to achieve it. This discovery shifts the case from a missing person search to a homicide investigation, with the added complexity of trying to understand the psychology of a father who could commit such violence. He's either dead or he's hiding, waiting for us to make the wrong move. Either way, the longer he stays out there, the worse it gets for everyone. Sheriff Chris Witsett. It has been more than a week since Travis Decker murdered his daughters. More than a week since their bodies were discovered at a remote campsite in Chelan County, Washington. More than a week of grief, shock, and unanswered questions. And now, the question everyone is asking: where is he? The search for Decker has evolved into something far more complicated than anyone expected. What was once a manhunt for a father who had killed his children has now become a battle of psychological survival. The landscape is vast, the terrain unforgiving. Decker, with his military background and deep knowledge of wilderness survival, has become more than a fugitive. He has become a ghost in the woods, evading the best efforts of law enforcement. Sheriff Witsett leads the charge, but the weight of the search has begun to take its toll. The hours stretch into days, and with each passing moment, the possibility of finding Decker alive grows more and more remote. Witsett's thoughts churn as he thinks of the man he is chasing. Travis Decker, the man who had once been a father to those children, now a cold-blooded killer. The question haunts Witsett. How did it come to this? For the officers involved in the search, the psychological toll is becoming evident. Deputy Rick Jensen, who had been part of the initial investigation, feels the strain. He's been up for days, walking the same stretch of forest, following the same false leads, only to come up empty-handed. The frustration is beginning to show. His steps feel heavier, his focus slipping. What if we never find him? Jensen wonders silently as he trudges through the woods. The thought feels like a weight, pushing down on his chest. Every time they think they are getting closer, the trail goes cold. Every new lead is just another false hope. The uncertainty gnaws at him. It's not just about finding Decker anymore. It's about needing to bring justice for those 3 little girls. Paityn, Evelyn, and Olivia. They can't be forgotten. But the more the days drag on, the more Jensen feels the growing emptiness of this search. Witsett, too, feels the weight of the hunt. The search was supposed to be a matter of finding the fugitive, but now it has become something deeper. Every passing day without success eats at him, slowly wearing him down, filling him with a growing sense of helplessness. The questions that come with Decker's actions continue to linger. What drove him to do it? The idea that a father, someone who had once been trusted with the care of his children, could commit such a brutal act is too much to reconcile. For Witsett, every moment he spends in these woods is not just about catching Decker. It's about trying to understand how anyone, let alone a father, could be capable of such horror. As June stretches into its 2nd week, the search for Travis Decker reaches new heights of intensity. The U.S. Marshals and FBI have joined the hunt, bringing in additional resources. The landscape around Chelan County has now become their enemy as much as Decker himself. They've scoured miles of mountainous terrain, but each lead seems to fade away. The sense of urgency is palpable. The search is no longer just about bringing Decker to justice. It's become a race against time. Sheriff Whitsett, now pacing, deep in thought, feels his frustration rising. His mind spins with calculations, trying to figure out where Decker could be. There's no doubt in his mind that Decker is still alive. The sheer survivalist skills the man possesses are far beyond anything Whitsett's team is prepared for. The wilderness itself has become a barrier, and Decker knows it. If he's out there, he could be watching them, waiting for them to make a mistake. A potential sighting in the Enchantments, a backpacking area known for its rugged beauty and isolation, becomes the next lead. Hikers have reported seeing a lone man, disoriented and clearly out of place. The sighting is enough to send Whitsett's team into overdrive. They deploy a helicopter to scan the area, hoping for anything that could confirm the sighting. But by the time the team reaches the area, the man is gone. The trail goes cold. With every passing day, the growing frustration of the officers becomes harder to ignore. They aren't just searching for a man. They're searching for a mystery, for answers to a question that has no easy explanation. Where is he? Why is he hiding? What will it take to catch him? Back in Wenatchee, the emotional strain on Whitney Decker continues to build. Travis Decker, the man she married, the man she trusted, has become a distant shadow, an impossible riddle she can't solve. And yet, she is forced to face it every day. Each update about the search, each new piece of evidence or potential lead, hits her like a wave. Sometimes it brings hope, sometimes it dashes it. But always, it reminds her of what has been lost. Her daughters, Paityn, Evelyn, and Olivia. The emptiness of their absence is a constant ache. It feels like her life is suspended between two realities, grief and the search for justice. But more than that, Whitney struggles with the uncertainty of it all. Every time the news reports another lead, her mind spins with what-ifs. What if he's already dead? What if he's hiding nearby? The endless possibilities torment her, refusing to let her move forward. Each time she sees a potential sighting of Decker, the hope rises, but it never lasts long. Whitney finds herself caught in a cycle: hope and despair, rage and love. She loved Travis once, but now she only feels a deep, aching betrayal. How could the man who was supposed to protect their children be the one to destroy them? By June 10th, another critical discovery is made: Decker's online search history. The searches are chilling: how to disappear, how to survive off the grid, how to move to Canada. This discovery brings a new dimension to the investigation. It wasn't just a spur-of-the-moment killing. This was planned, deliberate, and cold-blooded. Decker knew exactly what he was doing. He had not only murdered his daughters to escape his past, he had prepared for it. For Sheriff Whitsett and the rest of the investigation team, this revelation was like a gut punch. It wasn't just about finding a man who had snapped. It was about trying to understand how a father could premeditate the deaths of his children in such a way. Decker's escape plan was methodical. He was not just evading justice, he was trying to disappear forever. This revelation shifted the investigation, making it clear that Decker wasn't just running from the law. He was running from the consequences of his actions and willing to sacrifice everything, including his own children, to escape them. As the days turn into weeks, the search for Travis Decker continues. But there is an overwhelming sense of uncertainty that hangs over everyone involved. No matter how hard they try, no matter how many resources they bring in, they can't seem to find him. The fact that Decker could be so close or so far seems to be both haunting and disorienting. The frustration grows. The search becomes more than just finding a man. It becomes a battle against time. How much longer can they continue? The reality of Decker's survival skills gnaws at them. The longer he stays hidden, the more it seems like he's slipping away forever. What happens if they never find him? What happens if he's lost to the wilderness forever? The discovery of Decker's search history brings a chilling realization. Decker had planned this escape long before the murders occurred. This shifts the narrative from a crime of passion to a premeditated act of violence, deepening the emotional complexity of the case. The realization that he was not only a fugitive, but a mastermind complicates the search, turning it into more than a manhunt. It's now a race to understand the psychological workings of a man who deliberately destroyed his family to escape his past.